Good morning, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment.
All right, I think it's a good time to start. What do you think, Michelle?
I agree. Okay, jump right in.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us and being on this call. My name is Chris Soto, and I serve as the Director of Innovation and Partnerships for the State Department of Education. And today I'm joined by some amazing colleagues, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'll start with John.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is John Monaco. I work in the governor's office and been working closely with Chris. And I'll pass it to Michelle.
Hey, everyone. My name is Michelle Doucette Cunningham, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut After School Network, and we're happy to have you all here with us today. Tracy?
Hey everybody, Tracy Lay from EdAdvance. I'm the Chief Talent and Development Officer here and also serve on the Board of Directors for the National After School Association, and glad to see so many of you here.
Great, thanks, Tracy. And, just again, a big shout to the RESCs, the Regional Educational Service Centers, specifically Tracy and EdAdvance, also our After School Alliance, who have been tremendous partners throughout this process. In addition, I want to share that we arrived here based on collaborative meetings that we had with over 40 stakeholders through our work on the Accelerate CT Task Force. And very briefly, the Accelerate CT Task Force and Accelerate CT more broadly is the State Department of Education's initiative to address learning recovery for the state students as we enter the summer and next school year. So for those that are unfamiliar, and we'll get into this in the slide, but also this $11 million is made available through federal funds that were passed through the American Rescue Plan. And I'd like to briefly thank Senator Chris Murphy, who championed this set aside along with the rest of our congressional delegation. I'd also like to thank our Governor, Ned Lamont, and Acting Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker, who have really made summer enrichment and summer learning a priority for students as we come out of this school year, pushing us to be bold, pushing us to take advantage of these resources to help as many students as possible. And lastly, a genuine thank you to every one of you. We have over 600 people on this call, and thank you for endeavoring to make this summer a memorable one for students. And so just some housekeeping stuff. We're going to be using the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen to submit questions. We will also be recording today's session, and it will be posted on the Accelerate CT website, along with an FAQ question that's going to be updated every day. We're going to go through a few slides, but try to save as much time as we can for the Q&A. So let's jump right in. Great. So,
Oh, sorry.
oh, no worries.
There we go.
There we go. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to give an overview of both grants and explain how they differ. Then we're going to go into each one and break them down a little bit more. And again, please put your questions in the Q&A function. And even if we don't get to them, we're going to follow up with everyone on this call with an email on the outstanding answers that we didn't address. So 3 important notes here. The first is that we're only taking applications online. We already made some technical changes based on feedback that we've received. So we truly appreciate those who have gone in there already. I previously mentioned that this will be recorded and posted online. And finally, if you have any other questions during this process, there is an email, sde.summerenrichment@ct.gov. Great. So let's talk about the 2 grants that we have. And we'll start with the expansion grants. And so the governor and the commissioner have really been adamant about ensuring that we're doing everything we can to expand offerings to more children. And so, and particularly those who have been impacted hardest by COVID. And so when you think about the expansion grants, these are grants that may allow programs to offer scholarships to families, which might have been prevented them from participating in the past. Maybe your program normally serves 80 students a summer, and now with extra funds, you can serve 100. Or maybe transportation was a barrier for families, and now that you have this grant, you can offer transportation. So for some programs, this grant will help keep the program operating. Maybe COVID had a big impact on you making a decision on whether or not you were going to operate this summer. So these are all examples, and there could be many more, but we just wanted to give you a flavor of what the intention is here. And so with expansion, we're really looking at expanding access. I'll just say that again. We're really looking at expanding access, especially for those most impacted by COVID. The max award per site for the expansion grants is $25,000 with a max of 3 per organization. And we're going to award the money and we're going to award the grants until the money runs out, but we won't actually know the exact number until applications are in and reviews are completed. And then the last note on the expansion grants is that we will be awarding grants in all 6 RESC regions, and RESC stands for Regional Educational Service Centers, in case you were wondering what that acronym was. So on to the innovation grants. This is really our collective attempt to be bold and innovative, right? To give students an opportunity that maybe in the past we couldn't do because resources were limited. This focuses on scale. So maybe your entity or organization normally serves students in one community. But with this funding, now you can reach multiple communities. Or maybe it's not necessarily a camp, but you have an enrichment component that can be layered on to multiple summer programs in different regions of the state or across the state. So again, these are just examples, and we're really looking forward to the innovative ideas that we know exist. These grants are going to range from $50,000 to $250,000, just 1 application per organization. And there aren't any options if anyone is looking for funding in between $25,000 and $50,000. And so I want to stress one important point also on this slide is that $11 million can go relatively quickly. And so we really encourage you to work with your school district and municipalities to leverage and braid additional funding. For some on this call, the districts that you're in have received millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, which can be used for summer enrichment. Additionally, municipalities will also be receiving millions of dollars that can be leveraged, particularly for Parks and Recs camps. Philanthropy is also a huge partner who funds many of your programs. So, let's really use this moment and resources to provide students with a summer unlike any other. Quite frankly, this might be the only time in our life where we will see this influx of funds, and those entities and communities that are willing to work together, leverage and braid funding, are truly going to create something special for students. And one note on that is that we do recognize that some communities don't have the same resources as others, or maybe there are districts that didn't receive as much funding as others. But they might have the same need for students. So particularly our most vulnerable. That will definitely be taken into account as we review these applications. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John for our next slides.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris, for that overview. So what I'm going to do is going to go through the grant application criteria for each of the different grants that we had. As Chris noted, there are two, and each have their own set of eligibility criteria, grant award amounts, application requirements, as well as scoring criteria. I want to note that programs may only apply for one grant, either the expansion grant or the innovation grant, but not both. So we encourage interested applicants to identify the grant program that is right for them and their program's goals prior to applying in order to maximize your chances of winning a grant award. So I'll start here with the expansion grants. As Chris mentioned, the purpose of these grants is to expand existing capacity and be able to serve more students. The first criteria here is around age groups. So these grants will be used to serve school-age children between the ages of 5 and 18 years old. Although if you do serve students with special needs and who are still enrolled in school, those students can be served with this funding up to their 22nd birthday. There are 3 acceptable uses for this funding. The first, as we mentioned, is to serve more youth or children. So that could mean hiring additional camp counselors to have another group of students, renting a larger facility, extending the duration of the program, or extending the grades that are served. In the application, we will ask for some evidence that there is excess demand for your program beyond what you're able to meet right now. And that could include a wait list or a letter of support from a local superintendent or a municipal leader. And so we encourage applicants to furnish that in their application as a way to just strengthen their case that they can serve more students with this application grant funding. And then finally, applicants can use this funding for up to 40% of their total grant to cover transportation costs for students who may have otherwise had a hard time getting to the program. The next bucket here is around prior program experience. So expansion grants can go to programs that are either existing or that are completely new and being devised for the first time this summer, although we will award more points in the rubric to programs that have been operating for at least 3 years. Student population. So while programs can use this funding to serve all Connecticut students, there is explicit language in the federal American Rescue Plan that prioritizes groups of students that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And I'll read that for those who are on a phone. That is each major racial and ethnic group, children from low-income families, children with disabilities, English learners, gender, migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and student and youth in foster care. Enrichment is another obviously very important category, and we've taken a broad definition of enrichment, which can range from music to sports, STEAM, cooking. Programs can have an academic or learning acceleration component to them, especially those programs that are run by school districts, but we do require that enrichment activities comprise at least 50% of the total structured programming. Additionally, and hopefully not surprisingly, we want these programs to be in person as much as possible over the summer and not in front of a screen. And so as part of the application, we'll ask for just a sample weekly or daily schedule to help us understand what your program looks like and how it's being delivered. It's not on this screen, but I just did want to touch upon the durational requirements of the expansion grants. So for programs that serve children ages 13 and up exclusively, we do expect these programs to be open for at least 4 hours a day for 4 days a week. And this is in the RFP. For programs that serve children under the age of 13, we expect them to be open for a minimum of 5 hours a day, 4 days a week. If you do have a part-day participation or a half-day participation, we welcome you to partner with other programs to fulfill the rest of the day. So maybe that's partnering with a school-based program offering a morning academic session, and then your program offers an afternoon enrichment program. That is certainly not required as part of this grant application, but just something that we do encourage. And then the last thing I'll say on the duration is that for programs that go above and beyond those sort of minimum hourly requirements and day requirements, more points will be awarded in the scoring rubric. And again, this is all laid out in the RFP document on the SDE website. Okay, so that is the eligible activities for the expansion grants. I'll also go over the innovation grants now. So as Chris mentioned, these are larger grants between $50,000 and $250,000. So the evaluation and eligibility criteria of the expansion grant, that's going to be the same for children between the ages of 15 and 18 years old. It can go up to their 22nd birthday. The student population is the same, addressing populations that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Scale is a new criteria specific to innovation grants. So we're looking for programs that serve students on a regional basis or statewide. And there's two ways that we're thinking about this in the application. One, we're looking for programs that can serve a much larger group of students. Points in the rubric will be awarded starting at a minimum of 150 students. And then second, we're also looking for programs that can serve students from across the state or various regions, rather than focus specifically on a single community. So this might mean that for an innovation grant, if your program might operate in multiple sites, like a college campus in New Haven and a school district in Torrington and a town center in Sprague. So in the application, we would just ask for information on each of the sites that might benefit from this program. I want to just jump to accelerated ramp up while we are on scale, because they go hand in hand. I'll come back to the other two in a moment. So for accelerated ramp up, this is an important criteria because these grants will be going to programs that serve a larger number of students. Programs that are applying for innovation grants will need to be able to ramp up quickly if they don't have the infrastructure in place already. So this could, this could be by demonstrating in the application evidence of a partnership with a school district, with a college, a town, or other organization to show that there will be infrastructure in place both to serve a larger number of students, to recruit and serve a larger number of students, but also that there will be physical facility space to be able to provide that programming. Okay, so we'll jump back now to enrichment and record of impact. As you can see here, the enrichment activities are very similar to what we put in the expansion grant. We took a broad range of activities, though we will have a higher bar for quality and impact than in expansion grants. And that's where this record of impact criteria comes into play. We're looking for programs that provide enjoyable and challenging and engaging enrichment opportunities for students. But in the application, we'll also be looking for some type of impact or evidence of the program's impact on student outcomes. And that could be an evaluation of your program done by a third party in the past. That could be internal data that you have collected on student achievement, on graduation rates, on college and career readiness, or that could be, research that's out in the field that shows programs like yours tend to have a large impact on student outcomes. So as I mentioned, because these are larger grants and funding is limited, we want to make sure that we're directing innovation grant funding to those programs that have a superior record of improving student outcomes and moving the needle for them. The last two on here, so cost. So for innovation grants, we are expecting that these programs be provided at little or no cost to students participating. And then finally, there is no minimal or minimum durational requirement in the, for programs like there was in the expansion grants, although we will incentivize programs that offer full day programming for multiple weeks in the scoring rubric. And that's it for the innovation grants. Again, all of this criteria is laid out in the RFP, but if there are questions, we would be happy to answer them. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go over some of the specifics that are in the RFPs. And again, we're using the question and answer function if you joined us late to answer questions both via the question and answer function and also verbally. When we're done with the slides in a few moments, we'll be able to get to some of your questions. So again, there are 4 categories of eligible applicants: nonprofit organizations who have a current valid child care center or youth camp license. So this means that you have to be able to serve children ages 5 and over. You can be a child care center if you also serve older children as well. But this is not for only early education providers that only serve children ages 5 and under. This is meant for school-age children. You can also participate if you're a licensed exempt child care center or youth camp operated by a municipal agency, a private school, or if you're an organization that is specifically exempted by name in the statute. And there's a handful of those, but not many, and you know who you are. Also, if you're a local education agency, a school district that received less than $50,000 in the elementary and secondary funding, the ESSER funding, the emergency school relief funding, because you do not have much money to be able to provide school, summer, and additional programming, like some of those that were mentioned earlier, those are eligible for this round of funding, but only if you received less than $50,000 in the second round of ESSER funding. Also, if you're a licensed exempt nonprofit community-based organization that serves exclusively children ages 16 or older. If you're serving children who are 16, 17, or 18, and no one younger than that, then you do not have to apply for a youth camp or a child care license. So therefore, you are entirely exempt from needing those licenses. So for those programs serving older children, you may also apply. That said, we encourage partnership. So a partnership of any of those organizations, either working with other organizations or with school districts, are certainly welcome to apply. The primary lead partner, however, has to be one from the top 4 groups. So even if you're partnering with the school district and they received more than $50,000 in ESSER II funding, they may not be the lead applicant. One of the other 4 are the lead applicant. For both grants, there are some additional program quality requirements, in part because licensing does not apply to every program. So this is in the RFP in great detail, but I wanted to go over these here. All camp staff that supervise children are going to be required to have 2 hours of training that supports student social emotional learning. If you're an existing program that has already provided that since last summer, that's fine. You do not need to take more. The Connecticut After School Network will be providing free online training for you to share with your staff. Whether or not you get this grant, you'll be able to access that free training on our website. So this will not cost you any more than the time it takes to support that. We will have a variety of other trainings available as well, but the requirement for the grant is that you agree that your staff will have participated in at least 2 hours of training. It can be provided by anyone. It does not have to be the After School Network training, but we're just making that free and available to you. In addition, every program, of course, is concerned about the health and safety of their students. So it's very important that staff have to receive training on safe operations this summer, especially because we're still looking at social distancing and infection control requirements. So there's a requirement that you'll follow state guidelines and CDC. In addition, it's important that there be a staff person who's at least 18 years of older who's on site at all times. When the program is in operation, you need to have a site coordinator or a supervisor who's in charge, and that person or persons, you might have more than one person if they turn off, but whoever it is who's in charge has to be at least 18. We would hope that you would pick someone with good experience, et cetera. I'm sure you've all had opportunities to think about the types of staff you would hire, but the bare minimum is they must be 18 years of age. And that is at the start of the camp. They can't turn 18 during the summer. They must be 18 before the camp starts. In addition, any camp that's going to be providing any waterfront or swimming activities or as part of a field trip, you must have an on-site person who's at least 20 years old and has American Red Cross lifeguard training at that site. So if, for example, you had kayaking at one end of the pond and swimming at another, you would need 2 directors, one for each area, because the swimming person can't get to the lifeguard kids on time. So that's a requirement there. Similarly, staff acting in the lifeguard capacity have to meet the requirements of the regulations of Connecticut state agencies. You can find those online, section 19A-113A-1. And we'll be happy to answer more questions about those as they go. And obviously, I'm going too fast through the slides here. So, and for this last one, the staff to student ratio is an essential part of quality. And when we're looking at when students on the water are on or near the water, that staff ratio is 1 staff person to 6 students. And that's related to current Office of Early Childhood regulations. We'll go into that a bit more. Again, so that's an important difference for some programs who have not been subject to camp licensing before, but that is essential that there be enough people on site that you have 1 staff person to every 6 students. Similarly, for all counselors in the program that are overseeing children, those counselors have to be 16 years of age to get started. And again, it's at the start of their employment. Similarly, you can work with counselors in trainings, CIT programs as they're called. You can have helpers that are 14 years of age, but again, those 14 years of age students are in training and they're not responsible directly for children. That's meant to also provide support and training for them at age 14 and begin to build them into counselors in future years. Programs must maintain a ratio of at least 1 staff to 10 children if the children are under age 6. So if you have a group of 5-year-olds, that's 1 to 10, or 1 staff to 12 children under age 11. And if you have a group of kids who are over age 11, it's 1 staff to 15 children. That ratio has to be maintained at all times. And if it's a mixed age group, you use the ratio for the youngest child in the group. That ratio must also be maintained during outings and trips, except if they were structured activities. Again, prior to the start of camp, administrators have to develop a written emergency management plan, and they're listed here what your should include in that emergency management plan, at least addressing fire, crisis response, medical incidents, weather-related incidents, man-made disasters, natural disasters, or acts of terrorism. It has to address evacuation and removal to a safe location, lockdown procedures, notification and reunification of parents with their children, process of notifying emergency personnel, and any necessary methods and procedures for the evacuation and relocation of children with special needs developed in consultation with the parents of such children. All of your staff need to be trained in the details of the plan, and a copy of the plan has to be maintained on site and available to all staff for reference. In addition, there are a number of assurances about how the program will be implemented related to both data and monitoring. Some of those include that any organization applying for this grant agrees to comply with all state and federal statutory and regulatory requirements as detailed in the program assurances section of the application. But it's including but not limited to all the legal requirements regarding oversight for youth programs and access to minors. Programs have to engage with other community stakeholders, including school districts, to ensure the program is enhancing and not duplicating services. Programs are expected to participate in any data collection that is required by the state or federal government for the use of this funding, and to permit visits at any time during the summer program for quality advising and/or monitoring purposes. Programs agree that the organization applying maintains the full responsibility for the operation of the program, regardless of any partnership, volunteer, or subcontractual arrangements. Programs also agree to ensure program accessibility for individuals with disabilities. In addition, materials should be made available in accessible formats. And also that programs agree to provide a final report in such format that will be provided by the Department of Education not later than the end of October this year. Both of the grants will be reviewed and scored against the scoring rubrics that are included in the appendix of both RFP documents. And you can see very clearly what criteria will be used. At the time after the grants are submitted on May 10th, SDE expects to notify applicants by May 24th, and then it will initiate a grant award letter. That does not mean the funds will be in your hands on May 24th. It means you will be notified of a yes or no as the process then works forward. In addition, some disclaimers. The State Department of Education is going to retain all proposals submitted, and they become part of the public domain after the competition is completed. The CSDE reserves the right to award in part or to reject a proposal in its entirety in part, and to waive technical defects if in its judgment the best interest of the state would be served. And all awards are subject to the availability of federal funds. Grants are not final until the award letters are executed. How to apply. Please do not submit applications via email. There is an online form. You can see the link here. It's on the Accelerate CT Summer Enrichment page. Both of them have links to an application. Again, the applications must be submitted by May 10th at 5 p.m. and no later. If you have questions as you're working through the application process, please submit them via email to sde.summerenrichment@ct.gov. In addition, any questions that are answered both here on this call, but also at that email, will be added to the frequently asked questions document. In the RFP, there is an example of the questions that are included. So for those of you who would like to share an application with your partners, for example, you can work on that together. Take the application template from the document in RFP and work through that. You could make it a Google Doc and have everyone contribute there. And it's always the best idea to use a template like that and then copy and paste your answers into the online application. As someone who has submitted many online applications for my nonprofit over the years, it's essential that you have a copy because you never know when the power is going to go out and you don't want to lose any data. So always make a copy, for example, on a Word document and cut and paste into the application. That's just general best practice. And again, just a reminder that programs need to respond to all of the whole child, specifically their academic, social, and emotional needs, as well as to address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on different student subgroups. And that includes racial and ethnic groups, low-income families, children with disabilities, English learners, gender, migrant students, students experience homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. So just as a reminder, applications are due by May 10th at 5 p.m. Applications must be submitted online. Emails will not be accepted. Applicants are expected to be notified within 2 weeks after that. And frequently asked questions are on the website as well as emails. So now we're going to jump to a chance for us to provide questions and answers. I see that there are a lot of questions and answers in the Q&A box. Please continue to add those there. And we will spend the next part of the next 25 minutes answering these. Chris, if you're able to come back online with me, that would be great.
Yeah, I was furiously trying to help with some of the question answering. So it's good questions in there. I think we got to about 80 of them so far, but there's probably about 90 left.
Right, so we're going to continue to take a look at those. So one of the questions that I know is coming up has to do around eligibility. So if you're a nonprofit agency that does not have a childcare license, but your program serves high school youth ages 14 to 21, not the 16 to 21 we had mentioned earlier, are you open to being able to apply, or what's the requirement in terms of the licensing for a nonprofit high school program?
Do you want to just answer that one, Michelle?
Yeah. So you and I will just play tag team. The answer to that question is that if you are serving any children that are ages 15 and younger, so 14 and 15-year-olds, you're required by state law to have a youth camp license, unless you are otherwise explicitly exempted as mentioned in the eligibility. So if you're a nonprofit, you can run a program for 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. But if you're going to serve the younger group, you need a partner with who has a license that you can work together with. So if you have a partner and your partner has a license, you can do that. Maybe it should be that the licensed partner should be the one who is applying and you're the partner with them. So how about private schools? You want to address that?
Sure. So as it currently stands, nonprofit entities are who can apply. So it would depend on whether or not that private school is a nonprofit entity. If it's for profit, then they're not eligible to apply. But as Michelle said, if you do decide to partner with one of the eligible entities, then you can certainly apply in partnership.
One of the early questions, which we may have gone over, but is worth repeating, about applying for both. How many applications can people provide, Chris?
Great. So, we are encouraging entities to apply for one or the other. We think we made it pretty clear, what we're looking for in innovation grants, what we're looking for in expansion grants. There might be one entity that could do both, but we're encouraging programs to apply for one or the other. Now, if you think for whatever reason that you could do both, maybe your organization does serve some local sites, but then you also have another entity, another component that could do some statewide or regional scale, those applications need to look distinctly different.
And it's important to note that if you're an organization that has multiple sites, they are separate applications. So
for the expansion grants.
For the expansion grant, you would have to apply 3 separate times and not just once and mentioning the 3 sites. So there's a
Michelle, could you clarify the question that has come up around the OEC requirements versus what we have on page 6?
Sure. So the Office for Early Childhood licenses summer camp programs. And there are also some programs that are naturally exempt from licensing, such as schools. So those programs, however, in order to access Care for Kids, have a certain list of program quality requirements. The list for this funding application is a subset of that list of what the requirements are for the Care for Kids programs. You don't have to follow every program quality requirement there. but you must follow all of the ones listed in this application, which are a subset of those that are required by the Office for Early Childhood.
And that's what we have on page 6 in the RFP.
Exactly, exactly. A question came up about how many weeks are they expected to run the program, especially given the fact that if funding comes out at the end of May, school gets out, 3 weeks later.
Yeah, so, I think this is a good point here. If your program does only serve, if you're an eligible entity, you can apply, right? But the rubric is pretty clear on how your application is going to be stronger. So I think this applies to a bunch of different questions about whether or not you can apply. If you're an eligible entity, you can apply. Now, whether or not you're going to have a competitive application, that's where the rubric comes in, right? And so if you don't, serve a certain hours of the day, or you don't serve a number of days in the week, then maybe you're not going to score as high on the rubric for the application. Now, could you make that up in other places? Maybe, but again, I don't want to confuse the two on whether or not just because you're not going to hit certain things, you're not eligible to apply. It's very clear on who's eligible. Whether or not you're going to have a strong application, look at the rubric, and I think that'll answer a lot of questions.
I think that's a great idea, Chris, because it is a competitive process. And as John mentioned earlier, the funding will only go so far. So in order to make sure that your application is as strong as it can be, you should look in the first appendix of the RFP and look very concretely to see if your program can score, what you can do with your program design to make it more competitive. Doesn't mean you can't apply if you don't meet all of those, but
Exactly.
that there may be some that would make it more competitive and more likely to be funded. There was a question about the innovation grant. Can they apply for an innovation grant if they only serve one town or city?
Yeah, so I saw this question come up somewhere else. These innovation grants are really focused on regional scale or maybe statewide scale. But, we did talk about, the title of the grant is innovation. So if you do have some type of compelling program and you're serving students at scale within one community, it would really, again, I would look at the rubric and see how compelling your narrative is that's going to allow you to have a strong application. There's a component in there in the rubric that talks about multiple communities, and so if you're not hitting that, then what else are you bringing kind of in your application that would qualify for an innovation grant?
Right, thanks. There were a number of questions about the duration requirement that John mentioned early on in terms of the number of hours and the number of weeks. It's different for younger students versus older students. So it's a minimum of 4 days of programming each week. And for older students, ages 13 and over, it's 4 hours per day. And for the younger student, it's 5 hours per day. That's the minimum duration as part of this grant between you and the partners that are included in this application. Your application, however, is stronger if you're able to meet families' childcare needs. And that would mean 9 hours probably at a minimum of programming per day, because parents need to get to work and from work if you're not providing transportation. So again, you can do that in partnership and show that your program offers services that meet families' childcare needs, but it's really essential that the very minimum of the 4 and 5 hours and 4 days a week. Again, take a look at the rubric and you can see where the additional points are added and for what levels of duration they're provided.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in here, again, we can think about what summer looked like before COVID, right? And, whether or not you were kind of operating or entities were operating kind of on their own and doing what they did. This is an opportunity, we're hoping, where, if maybe you don't have a full day or if maybe you don't have the full week, is to really collaborate with the entities that do have extra resources to help you get there.
There are a couple of other questions about collaborations that came up. One in particular was about if you apply for one grant in collaboration, can you apply for a second grant for the same site separately?
So one site is in
So
collaboration.
in this case, it's a school and a public library. If they apply for for the school site, the public library is going to be a partner. Can the public library
I
apply?
got it. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I mean, there's no one size fits all here. Our communities are all different. And if there's one program with a different partner for one site and then something else on another, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right there. The trick is a different site. So an application for the public library and then a joint application for the library program in joint at the school site.
Right.
We don't want to have lots of applications for a single site because there's only going to be one award per site.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean if you have 4 different programs operating in a school, 4 different nonprofits, if they all apply separately for the same school, only one will be awarded for that site, but 4 applications from 4 different organizations. Sometimes that happens. We expect you to do some calling around and make sure that you're not duplicating services. If you're going to be at the school site, you should be in contact with maybe the school principal and ask them who else is providing services at this site this summer. That's not a bad question to ask anyway. But again, we want to make sure that the funding can reach as many programs as possible and therefore are not allowing a lot of applications from the same sites.
And Michelle, what about overnight camps?
Sure. So certainly there are lots of overnight camps in Connecticut, and private overnight camps are not eligible to apply. That was one of the questions that had come up because private for-profit organizations are not eligible. You have to be a not-for-profit or otherwise private school or partner to apply. But there are nonprofit overnight camps too. And some overnight camps provide day camps. So there are some overnight students and then students who go home at night, and they have both programs running together. If they were going to expand the day portion of the camp, then they can apply, and they can apply for that day portion to bring more kids in to make use of those services. So you're not excluded from applying, but the grant cannot be used for the overnight portion of the camp. It has to be for students who go home at night and come in during the day. So sorry if that's a little complicated, but we do know some programs that apply that for whom that applies, and we did not want to exclude them entirely from this because we want to expand as much as possible, I guess, right? So how about summer athletic programs? Because I know there's a lot of types of camps that do, for example, my town has a soccer skills camp that runs all day, 3 weeks in August. Are they eligible?
Yeah, so, again, as long as they meet one of the eligibility requirements, they could essentially be eligible. But, again, I would encourage that program to look at the rubric. Is there any element of enrichment that's happening? And, most likely if it's just athletic, then, most likely that application is not going to be as strong as some of the other ones because we are looking for that enrichment component as well.
Mm. And I think the word that I saw in the RFP is purposeful play. And that's meant to be any type of play. It can be athletics as well, but it's meant to really meet the needs of all the students in the program, for sure.
Exactly.
There are probably some questions about budget that I'm coming across in here in terms of what's acceptable for the expenses. So, for example, a program like this might need to add staff, to serve more children, but could they also use the funding to expand their administrative staff or to expand staffing in other areas if that's what they need to expand further?
Yeah, I think if the narrative reflects that whatever the expense is that's going to help serve more students, help more families, then great. One expense that is not allowable is any kind of capital purchases.
What about supplies? What if a program wanted to purchase something and buy some supplies that go with the program? Because could they use it to buy masks for the kids?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I see another question here about special education. So can you speak a little bit to special education programs, or have there been any questions on that that have come up in the frequently asked questions yet?
I'll have to take a look, but if there's something specific, if it's if it's something kind of that's related to the law, please let us know. Again, the SDE.summerenrichment, and we can have our special education division take a look at that. But unless, there's so many nuances with special education that I'd hate to just, answer anything. I know that there's a lot of questions around lifeguards, and particularly if a camp is bringing students to somewhere where there are lifeguards, then do the staff need to be kind of certified?
And the answer to that question is yes. You can't rely on just the lifeguards at the town pool to be adequate for that. You have to meet that ratio, and your staff have to be able to be there to oversee to make sure that that's the case. We want to make sure it has a fun summer, but a safe summer.
And I think the key there is the ratio, right? So,
Yeah. In addition, there is a question about CPR certification, and I think we need to clarify that programs fall into different licensing categories. If you're a child care center year-round and you also serve during the summer, you still have to apply by your child care licensing regulations that are offered by and that you abide by under your child care license with OEC. Child care licensing is a little more strict than youth camp licensing. So you can't change what you're doing to apply for this just because you're getting funding from this. Remember, if you're a child care program, you have to abide by those child care licensing regulations. And if that means that all of your staff have to be CPR certified and first aid certified and certified to administer medications or whatever the requirements are, you have to still abide by that. The program quality requirements in here sets the bottom bar of what your program must require. And those are specifically because some programs don't have the child care or the youth camp licensing. So to be sure that everybody's at least meeting the bare minimum of program quality.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there might be some frustration out there about some of the requirements that are here. And I just want to share that, this is kind of federal funding. There are some things that maybe you're not used to attesting because this is, these are kind of federal strings. So if you're wondering why this might be a little bit onerous compared to some other funding sources, there are some requirements that as a state we have to meet in order to meet the federal guidelines and requirements of the American Rescue Plan.
There's a question that came up in the application. There's a question about the College Corps, and that's a new concept that hasn't been explained much.
Sure.
And a lot of people might have come up against that and said, what is that? How do I access it? Do I have to get funded to access it? What do you know that you can share with people, Chris?
Yeah, no, that's thank you for bringing that up. So the College Corps, what we're trying to do is essentially build a core of college students that could serve as staff to the various summer programs around the state. We've heard through our collaborative meetings that staffing may be a challenge this summer for programs. And so we are working with all of the colleges. This is available to any college student that's looking to work this summer. They're going to get training through Fairfield University around social emotional learning. And then those students would be deployed into the programs. The unknown here at this point is that, number one, we don't know how many applications we have, and we don't know how many college students we're going to get that sign up. And so until we kind of have those numbers, until applications are in, then we'll know how many college students can kind of go out into programs.
Thanks. There's a question about how soon you can hire staff before the program starts. I would argue that you can hire staff for your program as soon as you want. The program funding will not be announced until late May. So if you hire staff in advance, knowing you've applied for this funding, there's no guarantee you're going to get this funding. So you're taking a risk there. It does make sense to hire your staff early enough so that they're able to be trained and you're ready to go when your program starts. But it might be a good idea to wait until you know whether or not you are going to have this funding to hire the additional staff you might. For now, I would hire only the staff you would use whether or not you get this funding and not go ahead any further. Doesn't mean you can't interview them and have them ready, but I certainly wouldn't sign a contract with someone and offer a job in writing to someone for whom you do not yet have funding.
So this is a good question. I'm going to just bring this one up
Yeah.
about separate programs at the same location or building or on the same campus versus how we've been describing it as separate sites And so I would really think about, when we say sites, it would be separate programs, but, you really want to make a distinction in your application narrative. And again, those are going to be 3 separate applications. So even though it's the same place, right, the same campus, there are 3 different applications if it's 3 different programs.
Right, but that should be clear that if you're a big program in one school, you can't have a program for first and second graders, a program for third and fourth grade, and then a program for fifth and sixth graders. Just because you call it a program doesn't make it a program. You would have to make one application then for the first through sixth grade students.
And I know there are a lot of questions around OEC licensing. How long does it take? What does it look like? We encourage you, and we can try to put that link in the chat before we come off, but encourage you to look at that so you can be clear on what that looks like for your organization.
There's a question about, is there a list of the eligible school districts who did not receive the ESSER II funding? I don't know if that is up anywhere. Do you have a copy of that?
So I don't have the copy with me right now. I will say what I can do is put a link to what the ESSER II allotments are for districts. It's not sorted in any way. So you might have to just go alphabetically to see your district, but it's about 30 districts, and I'll put that link in the chat.
That would be great. And then we'll also put that link in the frequently asked questions for people who haven't seen that before in case they want to look for it there. There was a question about printing out the application. And again, if you print out the full RFP, at the end, there is a sample application questions, a sample template at the end under how to apply. So that includes all of the questions. What it doesn't include, though, is the full list of all of the assurances. Those are a little further up in the RFP, but every list of the assurances that you would have to sign off on the signature page are listed in full in the RFP. So there's no other place that you have to have a signature page to do that. You can look at the RFP and everything you need to agree to is there in writing. We are almost up against our time. I see that we have 3 minutes to go. Is there anything in particular that you want to address or let people know about, Chris, as we're moving forward? Or John, if there's anything that you come up as we've been talking?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll kick it back to John. I think there's probably about 100 outstanding questions. Some of them might be duplicative, and so we'll go through those ASAP and get communication out to you around the outstanding questions that weren't answered. As you can imagine, there are a lot of questions, or as you kind of illustrated here, there are a lot of questions. This is a new pot of funding. We're building the plane as we're flying here. The American Rescue Plan was just passed, and so we're learning a lot as we're going here. But at any point in this process, if you have any questions, email sde.summerenrichment@ct.gov. That's being manned every day, and we'll get those questions out. The FAQ is also going to be updated every day. So for instance, there might be 15 things on there right now, and after today, based on the questions that we answered, we're going to go in and update that FAQ. So I think that's about it. Again, thank you to all of you. We had over 700 people on the call, which shows, I think, the interest, but also the need that students and families have this summer. And thank you for doing the courageous work that you're doing to make sure that they have a good summer. John, anything else?
No, I think that's great, Chris. Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Michelle?
Just on behalf of ourselves, the Connecticut After School Network, and the Tracy Lay, I know has been busy answering questions online as fast as we can. All of your questions will be addressed in the frequently asked questions. Be aware, though, with hundreds of questions coming in, it'll be challenging to find them. Use your Control F function to search for words that might help you to find that. We will address them all. Again, you can always ask additional questions in the email because it's important that this happen. Again, start your partnerships soon because this is a very fast application, but if you take a look, it's also not a super onerous heavy lift type of an application. It really looks like it's doable in terms of getting that done on time. But again, there will be no applications accepted via email or after 5 p.m. on the 10th. So please, those are very, very specific rules. Again, specifically, you may only apply for up to 3 sites for the expansion grant or the innovation grant, not both. So pick and choose your strategy wisely, and we're here to help as we can as the time goes on. So thank you all so much for participating today, and we look forward to reading all of your applications down the road. Thank you.